So it's our pleasure to have Dr. Isobel Pearsall join us today. Isobel is the Director of Marine Science Programs for Pacific Salmon Foundation. She wears many distinguished and highly demanding hats. She's a Canadian project coordinator for the Salish Sea Marine Survival Project, which is a major transboundary effort across the US and Canada, and with over 60 member organizations. Isobel also oversees several major programs in nearshore and estuary habitat restoration and leads the Strait of Georgia Data Center, an online hub of ecological, environmental, and human use data for the entire Strait of Georgia. I'll pass it over to Isobel.
Thanks, Byron, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. I'm going to talk to you about some tools that we are in the process of developing at the Pacific Salmon Foundation to really help guide nearshore salmon habitat restoration, and some things that we are in the process of developing and will implement over the next couple of years. And I'm calling in today from Gabriola, traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw, and just want to thank Julian because he has really laid the groundwork, many overlaps, and great background and a start for what I'm going to be talking about today. So the Marine Science Program, for which I am the director at the Pacific Salmon Foundation, was really born out of the Salish Sea Marine Survival Project. It has a sort of timestamp on it here, but it's actually an ongoing initiative in many ways because we are keeping the sort of transboundary meetings going from this work. This program was developed, in the around 2009, and the aim was to really understand the causes of declines that we were seeing in coho, chinook, and steelhead within the Salish Sea. So it was a major transboundary ecosystem-based interdisciplinary program with many different projects going on at the same time, all aimed at furthering our understanding of these declines and very much focused on the early marine period for these fish. And so we had a transboundary synthesis team that put together, using a weight of evidence approach, what came out as, the causative and really key factors that have contributed to these declines. And this graphic is just showing the period of the life history when fish are coming out of rivers, and then the turquoise fish are the sort of life history period that we were really focusing on. So starting in freshwater, moving out into the estuaries and into the Salish Sea itself. And a whole bunch of different factors showed up. There was no smoking gun, as I think we would all understand in terms of what are the causes for declines, but estuaries are up there as one of the key considerations, the health of the estuaries, the state of estuaries, and Julian has laid the complete foundation for the importance of these regions for feeding and for, hiding from predators. And when we look at the two key factors that really showed up, food supply and predation are showing there as the sort of deep red main factors. We were very concerned about, food supply and how that's being impacted through climate change and changes, that are moving up from the bottom up, right through the food web to salmon, changes to herring, changes to timing of food availability. But that all starts in the estuaries, and Julian spoke to the importance for feeding in estuaries. And the second one is predation, primarily harbor seals, which have really increased in abundance in the Salish Sea. And again, Julian did speak to just the importance of complexity and having hiding spaces and habitat for these young fish as they first come out, so they can actually get away from these predators. And the other thing you can see there in yellow in the large circle around predation is forage fish. And just having a lot of forage fish in the Salish Sea really can buffer the level of predation by harbor seals on juvenile salmon. And we know that many of these forage fish are rearing in estuaries, on nearshore beaches, or on vegetation. So we're looking at things like herring and sand lance. So again, really pointing to the importance of these estuarine environments and how healthy they are. Out of this program, we had a whole bunch of recommendations, and these are some that really pertain to the work that we're continuing now within estuaries and nearshore habitats. I won't go through all of these, but just to say this laid the groundwork for what is the Marine Science Program. This is just a poster showing all the different programs that we have. We're really trying to address the sort of many pressures that were identified and are very obvious, that are listed there on the left-hand side, that are impacting salmon throughout their life history. And a lot of our estuarine studies are coming under our nearshore and estuary projects programs, and also Resilient Coast for Salmon, which you can see. And then a lot of the work underpinning all of this is happening at the Strait of Georgia Data Center. And so we have these pillars, and these sort of guide our actions in the marine science program. Obviously, we start by really trying to understand what are the bottlenecks to salmon survival, where and when and why are they dying, focus in on those locations. And then the second pillar is, with that understanding, can we then produce tools and information to help guide the restoration that will assist them, build resilience in the changing climate, which is the next pillar, and then translate, share that knowledge, and work with many partners and others to amplify our actions. So this is pillar 2, guiding restoration, producing different decision support tools, methods, guidance, so that we can try to prioritize what we're doing and where we're doing it. And just really the key components for this is, what are the key limiting factors? So there's lots of different factors, but how do we work out which ones we should be focusing on? And then develop these strategies for action and prioritize where and when we do things. One of the key ones that was mentioned in the last talk is obviously we have to learn from what's been done before. I think too often so much money goes into restoration and there is no follow-up or effectiveness monitoring. So are we really truly learning what works and what doesn't work? And then we need to be adaptive for the future in what we do. So in this pillar, we have, simulation of all of these different types of tools, which I will speak about now. So in our nearshore and estuary program, we've been working with many different partners, and this is a lot of work that we've been doing with Sea Change and other groups like Rugged Coast. And so we are implementing actions and trying to help fund actions that will protect these nearshore habitats, that will remove marine debris, put in things like voluntary no anchor zone, like markers to try to let people know where there are important habitats they shouldn't be anchoring in. But really the key question is, how do we discern what to do when and what things we should be focusing on? So one of the methods here is the RAMS method. And this was developed within DFO. It was something I was involved in many years ago, but it's something that we are becoming very interested in at the Pacific Salmon Foundation. And this method is basically designed to try and prioritize those factors that are affecting Pacific salmon. And we could be looking at single populations or stocks or conservation units. And it was adapted from a method developed by Hobday to look at the impacts of fisheries. So this is very much an adapted method that has come into BC and then was further adapted at the biological station for groundfish populations by Kendra Holt. And then Kim Hyatt, Wilf Lutkin, myself worked on it to adapt it for salmon. And it really began under the Wild Salmon Policy Objectives, but this has now become important under the Species at Risk Act and the fish stock provisions of the Fisheries Act. And the way that this works is really to bring expertise from stock and habitat specialists, and then bring in that local ecological knowledge and indigenous knowledge to try to achieve consensus on what the risks are and what actions should be implemented. It is a very simple, sort of scalable process, which is easily repeated in different areas. So there is a process that's followed. It's a lot of information that's gathered. So talking about how would you prioritize different estuaries, this can be done by sort of following this process of assembling and bringing in a lot of information. You apply these RAMS tools to try to discern what are the key considerations and issues, and what is the risk, and what will be the future risk if you don't do anything. And then part of the process really helps to identify data gaps and come up with suggestions for mitigation, and then providing results. And some of the products are just there on the left-hand side. Basically, you end up with a ranked list of these limiting factors. And because you've involved the local groups through roundtables, people are invested in the plan that is created, and then they have somewhere to go. It's not as though they're just choosing the easiest things to do, but there's a sort of a structured process in which those choices can be made. So this isn't something we've developed, but it is something that we have brought into the data center, and Paulina's at the data center and has helped a lot. And so she has mapped out where all the different RAMS processes have occurred. Initially, most of these were focused on freshwater and estuarine environments, and more recently, there has been a marine risk assessment for the entire west coast of Vancouver Island. But this mapping product, which will be available on the data center, it's pretty much done. Is somewhere where you can go and find the results for all of these different regions. You can pull out the habitat status reports and all the sort of pieces that we used for the process, and then the outputs and the key risks and actions that were suggested in each case. So that's one of the tools that we're trying to bring in. And just to go back to that one quickly, we don't have to go back to the slide. Not only will we have where and when did these occur, but we will also provide the methodology and basically the sort of templates for how you work through a RAMS process on that website at PSF, which I think will be very helpful. And the second tool that I wanted to talk about that is in development right now is being developed by Ben Skinner, who is a GIS specialist at the data center. And this is called a Community Salmon Restoration Atlas. And what this is that, there's just an understanding that we don't have information, all in one place that provides these sort of the data, the information about the different restoration projects that have gone on in BC. And so the Atlas is going to take all the information initially from our Community Salmon Program. And the Community Salmon Program has been funded at PSF since the late 80s and has been providing money to many different groups all around BC to carry out restoration projects. Now, not all of these are in estuaries, but we are gathering all of that information and putting it into this atlas so that people can actually find out which were these CSP programs and what was done, and we'll be basically creating this digital catalog and a map-based interface for searching. So our focus at PSF is to start with our own Community Salmon Program information and what was done where, and then to add information from other non-government funded programs. And then the key aims of this entire atlas are so that people can find out where restoration projects have occurred, what was the issue that was being addressed, how effective, was that project, what was actually done, what were the costs, and then all of this can be used to help make better decisions moving into the future. And it's really built upon this Washington State Salmon Recovery Portal. So we've met with these teams and we've been looking at how they have put something like this together. You can see this this example here. And so you pick up, you could click on a project, the metadata will show up, and then you can determine what the issue was and what was done. Sorry, I'm just trying to go ahead. So this one has, the whole project, we started with a lot of discussions with the DFO, Habitat Restoration Center of Expertise. We are trying to make sure that what we do will align with the work that's been done through the center so that we would have very similar layers that could then be interoperable and be pulled together, so we could end up with an atlas that would show projects that have been funded by DFO and then projects that have been primarily funded through different sources of funds. So those will be Community Salmon Program funded through PSF, and then we are going to be working with West Coast Aquatic and Redfish Restoration, and we'll be able to collate information for a lot of the West Coast projects, and then we will move on to other stewardship groups for the Atlas components that we are working on. So very much a collaborative project. A lot of work has already been done for a bunch of the projects through our Community Salmon Program at PSF. And the initial focus will be on these sort of marine and estuarine projects that CSP has funded. So that's the prototype that we're building right now will focus on what was done in these estuary and nearshore regions, and designing a sort of staged effectiveness monitoring approach so that we can actually, add in some information about those projects and, are they still standing? Did they have the outcomes that were expected? Over the last few years, since the Salish Sea project, came up with all the recommendations, we have been funding a lot of work with all these different groups. And, the number of people and interest in kelp and eelgrass restoration has just exploded. So these are some of the folks we're working with that are dealing with kelp projects. And Liam there, he has been working with Cheryl Bisgrove at SFU on developing cryopreservation methods so that we could actually biobank the genetic material of kelp, which in many cases is being lost. And so that is something I think is just a wonderful thing to have developed. We're looking at different ways of restoring, funding people at the Kelp Rescue Initiative that are looking at using green gravel or different methods, what genomic mixes should be used. And then looking to the future, doing some work with SFU for this future-proofing kelp, trying to see if we can actually, or they are looking to see if they can prime the gametophytes at that early stage so that they will actually invoke a greater level of thermal tolerance. And some other work that we have been helping fund over the last few years has been using satellite methodologies to look at changes in kelp resilience and persistence. And, the first project that has been done through Alejandra Morosoto and Misira Costa at UVic has very much focused on the southern Strait of Georgia and trying to understand how environmental conditions and abiotic factors, may allow for different levels of kelp resilience in the face of major changes in environmental periods. So, she's been looking at these different, she calls clusters. So those are all created with these different sets of abiotic variables like suspended matter in the water or sea surface temperature, the currents, the fetch, and the winds. So many different factors, and these different regions are 4 different clusters. They're color-coded differently because they have these sort of different array of these abiotic variables, so they cluster out differently. And then when we actually look at what's happening with the kelp, you can see large differences in these different regions in terms of resilience. And when we look at the cluster 3, that red area, that is the area that's facing the Fraser River and the plume, and there's much higher sort of suspended matter, we're finding that, we've had more issues as waters have been warming everywhere, but with those additional factors potentially of suspended matter, we see that red bar has actually pretty much disappeared and hasn't come back despite there being a fairly optimal period recently. Whereas the blue bar, which is really our coolest waters and sort of the most temporally, similar conditions, these regions seem to be able to withstand these different periods when we have changing conditions. So we are learning a lot about the conditions needed for retention of resilience in different areas. And all of that information will help guide, sort of prioritization of areas where we are most likely or more likely that kelp restoration would actually work. So some of the work that we will be doing will be the working with Alejandra to do some kelp habitat suitability mapping, very much focused within the Salish Sea, and also with MC Wright on eelgrass mapping. And the eelgrass work is really building on the huge body of work that Nikki Wright at Sea Change has done over her lifetime. And Nikki is in the process of retiring now, and so this is kind of her legacy is to pull all of that learning together. And so we will be creating this eelgrass habitat suitability tool on a very local scale in estuaries within the Strait of Georgia. Sorry, I keep losing my clicker, so that's the delays. Part of this project too is just the understanding, as I said, that huge proliferation of people working in this field is that we've done a lot over the last decade. There's been a massive amount happening in our understanding of kelp and eelgrass and marsh habitats. So another project that we will be starting this year is to pull together that understanding. And so we will be carrying out 3 fairly large symposia, one for marsh, one for kelp, and one for eelgrass in the fall of this year. And from those, we will create these state of knowledge documents. And then Nikki is developing an eelgrass mapping and monitoring tome, everything that she's pulling together from her life. And then we will do these eelgrass and marsh restoration handbooks and a chapter on biobanking for kelp. And again, these symposia and these products will be very much partnered initiatives with these groups that are on here and many more. So we are not doing these things on our own. They're definitely all very important partnerships. So, when we are looking at all of these issues and what do we do and what actions do we put into place, there's also a lot of work that we do within PSF and within the marine science program to gain more understanding of specific stresses. And many of these, as we're looking at, climate changes within estuaries and nearshore regions, we know will only worsen over time. So this is a fairly new project. It's just been going now. We're in our 2nd year to set up this early detection monitoring for European green crab. And these green crabs are exploding in some regions, and they are moving very quickly into, other areas. And they will definitely provide a huge stressor for eelgrass habitats, which are so important for young salmon. So this early detection monitoring program is underway, and I just wanted to talk about a tool that has been developed through the data center and with Maria Catanzaro, who's the biologist on the green crab project. So this tool is on the Strait of Georgia data center. This will not replace on-the-ground sleuthing for European green crabs. But by going in and really understanding their needs in terms of the habitat needs, which are really to be in these sort of muddy, intertidal areas with low wave energy and freshwater influence, cover, and sort of the food resources that they would be looking for, we can try to pull together spatial data layers that will help, provide some focus on areas that could be potentially important for us to go and have a look at. And there are some data layers in here that are harder to get. Those would be things like cover and food, and factors such as, the number of sculpins. You'll often find them in areas with sculpins, but you won't find them in areas where you might go crabbing for Dungeness crab. So I think over time we will add more layers to this, but it definitely helps with guidance as to, where in a region you might start the search for green crab and hopefully get to them before things worsen. Sorry, that's not clicking forward. Thank you. And then the other project I wanted to talk about, Maria, who I mentioned, and Kyla Sheehan are the leads for the Resilient Coast for Salmon program. I think we're in year 3 on this one and have a couple more years funded through Environment and Climate Change Canada. This program is really aimed at building understanding, capacity, and hopefully, implementation of nature-based solutions and reverting to, green shores or naturalized shorelines. And our key partner here is the Stewardship Center for BC. And, Julian spoke to coastal squeeze, and we know that there will be many issues with seawalls. So the part of this project I wanted to talk about was just the work that we're doing with our little boat Wilbur to better understand what is the extent of coastal modification along the east coast of Vancouver Island. So Wilbur's outfitted with a high-resolution camera inside and then a 360 camera up top. That's the same as people are using for the street view that you see on Google Earth. And basically, the boat is traveling, as close to shore as it can go, and it's moved all the way from Petta Bay at the bottom of Vancouver Island and has made it up to Comox, and now we will be going up to Port McNeill this year. And these cameras are taking these high resolution images every 4 seconds, plus there's a video. And the value of this is that we are getting very high detail information about the shoreline and the extent of coastal modification. And we are also getting the whole 360 perspective. So from the 360 camera, you can look at things like, mooring fields, or how many creosote pilings have been left and abandoned in the water, or you could look at local kelp beds. So you get more of that 360 image. And from these data, the team are basically creating this layer that they have taken the sort of footage from Wilbur that has all gone into a website called mapillary.com, and it's excellent because all the footage is there and is all open to anybody. And they are pulling out key features, and you can see on the map to the right there, this is the area of Oak Bay, and the orange line is showing the extent of coastal modification with seawalls and other hardened infrastructure, riprap. And about 52% of that community area is hardened shoreline. And we have these data for the entire East Coast. So it's a pretty extraordinary data set. And then, as I said, we also have these sort of hardened, overwater structures. We could look at docks. We can also look at the extent of log coverage on beaches. The talk earlier was, it's great to have the logs with the root wads and all the benefits that they have. But there's an awful lot of log debris from the logging industry that is floating around on beaches and clogging them so that forage fish cannot spawn. So we are looking at that and actually getting that image into a digital format in the Strait of Georgia Data Center as well. Sorry, I'm trying to go forward. And then just another point from the Resilient Coast team is really trying to provide tools. Like a lot of community members will be saying to us from stewardship groups, what can we do? And this is this is half the list of the different tools that they have put together on their website, which is shown there. And then just quickly around the data center, I'm almost at my end of time. So the data center has produced a mapping product, the Marine Reference Guide, which has a huge number of spatial data layers for the Strait of Georgia, showing all of these different habitats, where are the fish rearing, and what are all of these different key stresses. And this is just one showing predicted shoreline sensitivity, sea level rise. So these overlays can tell us a lot of, different information. I'm just going to head to the next, please. Oh, I don't know if it went to, yeah. So just, different overlays that we're looking at. Where are the log booms? We know these are an issue. Seals sit on them, and they're basically feeding platforms for seals. Where are these in relationship to the estuaries? And next, please. And then we can look at forage fish beaches. There's some great work on habitat suitability for forage fish. We also have a lot of information on where forage fish are being found. How does that relate to shoreline sensitivity? And then also we are adding over the layers for our forage fish. We can look at which of those habitats where we think or we have found forage fish are we seeing a lot of log boom coverage and clogging of those beaches, so they're just not going to be able to get up there to spawn. And where do we also have risks associated with the extent of coastal modification? And so with all of these data, we will be creating these estuary report cards. This will be a very much partnership with Sea Change. They're doing a lot of on-the-ground work right now in estuaries. They're really trying to understand how you rank estuaries based on all kinds of different components. Do they have nursery refugia, high carbon sequestration? Do they have salt marshes, salmon bearing streams, undeveloped backshores? So that they're doing a lot of data collection, and we are adding to that for the estuaries that they are not working in, and basically producing these guides which show us the health and condition of these different areas, changes over time, and recommendations to fill in any sort of monitoring gaps. And this is just to show that we have a link there to the Marine Science site if you have interest in some of our programs, and a link also to the newsletters. We create quite informative newsletters from all of our different programs, and we'd be happy for you to join up and be on our news mail-out list. And I'm done, so thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Isobel. That again, a lot of information. It's amazing how many initiatives you sort of highlighted and covered there, and the numbers of partners and all the different tools, including mapping, guidebooks, data sets, and other sources of information. And I know I, for one, and I'm sure many of our other our participants appreciate and value the work it takes to bring that kind of information together and make it accessible. And so thank you so much for sharing that here. I'll maybe pass it to Jason to look at the Slido for some of the questions or some other comments of his own. But thank you very much as well.
Well, I'll start just by saying the work that Isobel's doing with PSF is awesome, and hopefully everybody else thinks so. I say that as obviously with a vested interest, being one of Isobel's biggest supporters and fans. So really appreciate all the work that Isobel and her team are doing. The first question on Slido, I'll get Isobel and Byron to have a look at it, because I think this is one, Isobel, I'd be interested to start with any thoughts or comments you have around how we can think about having strategic coordination so that these local restoration actions have the highest impact and success. Maybe you can offer some thoughts there, or if you had any examples where you've had some success or progress on that. But I'd also maybe even see, Byron, if you have any thoughts on that from the DFO Restoration Center of Expertise perspective, or even more broadly from the perspective of DFO. But I'll start with you, Isobel, and see what your thoughts are on that one.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think that, in somewhat ways, I think that's building on things like your Salmon Action dialogues, where you have to make sure you have everyone at the table. There's such a massive amount of great work going on, and, people don't always know what each other is doing, and sometimes there's failures in bringing all the local communities. I think a lot of these tools, including things like RAMs, and a lot of the forage fish work, it's already community-based. There's a lot of community-based programs for monitoring, and we have all that sort of bottom-up layer that's so important to have all those people at the table. But I think us working with, the Center of Excellence and having that sort of higher level coordination, bringing in all the different First Nations that are living in these areas is the really big part of it. So I think that's kind of something that is in your interest area, Jason, very much.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely something that crosses over into a number of different program lines or activities that we have at Pacific Salmon Foundation. But Byron, do you have any thoughts on that? Sort of taking your moderator hat off for a second and just commenting on it from the perspective of your chair at DFO.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Yes, within the Habitat Restoration Center of Expertise, that is one of the focus of some of sort of an expanded capacity we've had in the last number of years, is to work on pulling together and making accessible information around restoration specifically, but also working in a broader context within DFO on data sharing and data visualization for the information that DFO has on Pacific salmon in general. And so those, again, as I said earlier, I always appreciate being able to find information that's available and have it presented in a way that's accessible and useful, as opposed to having to dig and having to wade through data sets to find what it is you're looking for. And so we certainly are doing that within DFO and working with partners like PSF to try and make sure that people have the information they need to carry on this important work when they need to. So really appreciate, again, as I said, seeing some of the work that you folks are doing to put that in the public context now as well.
All right, well, you handled that well. I kind of put Byron on the spot without a heads up on that, so thanks for that, Byron.
Thank you, Jason.
I'm going to flip it to Byron in just a second to pick up a question. But the one at the top of the list here, it's got a few votes up around some kind of place-based group. And in the background, Morgan and Laura from DFO are helping to stick handle some of the questions coming in through Slido. And I know that Morgan has replied back to Jacqueline saying that the DFO Habitat Center Restoration of Expertise has this at the top of their list in terms of some kind of nearshore restoration working group, and they're expected to be making progress on that over the next couple of months, so stay tuned. So I just share that with everybody on Slido so that you know that in the background the DFO team has responded to that and are on that. And Byron, I'll turn it over to you to pick the next question.
Sure, just looking at the next Slido one that sort of has a number of thumbs up about excitement about the Community Restoration Atlas coming together, and any kind of comment you can make about how that might be expanded.
Sure. So what we're adding in from the Community Salmon Program is for the entire province. So we are putting in everything that we can get, I think, from 2015, where we have, better reporting from the Community Salmon projects. That is our focus right now. So that will be BC-wide. At this point, we are partnering with these folks on the island, but our aim is to expand. So this will be, all different community projects that are being funded through various means will be included. So yes, it will be expanded over time. We should have a prototype by the end of the year for most focus on nearshore and estuary. And then, of course, there will be the DFO layers themselves, which will be province-wide too. So at that point, we hope to bring it all together. So yeah, short answer is yes, we will carry on.
I think I'll just add a comment to that, I know that the DFO team are working on a restoration database for projects that their habitat restoration teams have been leading or engaging in. PSF is working on a database, as Isobel said, from starting with the things that our Community Salmon Program has funded with all the partners that we work with around the province, but we'll also be bringing other data in. But there really is a lot of data out there, and I think at this time there is, as far as I'm aware, no standardized system for how we capture, record, share, and then build from this. But as Isobel said, we're working on it. We know DFO is working on it. We understand other people, in some cases, are also working on things, and we'll continue to look to bring those things together as best we can, so that we start to have as much as possible shared information and shared platforms. I think if people don't mind, we'll squeeze one more question in before we take a break, if you can indulge us, Isobel. It's a question from Scott around RAMS, the risk assessment method for salmon, and he's asking, could something like that be done at a broader geographic area such as the Salish Sea?
Most definitely. So over the past year, it was applied to the west coast of Vancouver Island. That was done through DFO, and very much involving the roundtables that are all developed there and working with West Coast Aquatic. So that was a pretty large region, and we were looking at sort of marine issues. In fact, for that process, it was following those fish, right from estuaries into nearshore sounds where they're rearing, and then eventually up north, all the way up to the Gulf of Alaska and back. So it was an even larger scope. Applying this to the Strait of Georgia or the Salish Sea would build upon the sort of huge amount of information that we already got through the Strait of Georgia, the Salish Sea Marine Survival Project, and could definitely be done, yes.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you for that. I'll just remind everybody who's watching that we're going to have Julian, Isobel, as well as our next two speakers, Jason and Tom, will be together on a panel in our last segment just before lunch. So if you had questions that you didn't have a chance to put in, or that will come to you that kind of build off of maybe the series of presentations, you will have a chance to put things forward for all of our panel members. But Byron, maybe I'll just take us to break here. We're due to have a break around now. And for everybody, we're going to sign off on the live broadcast for a few minutes, and we'll return sharply at 10:35 for our next segment. So thank you.